marked, and abandoned pursuant to existing rule, COGCC rule 1103. That includes cutting off those risers below grade and sealing those lines. We continue to believe the investigation to date demonstrates there is no immediate threat to the neighbors in the Oak Meadows subdivision. In collaboration with Frederick Firestone Fire Protection, discussing additional and appropriate investigative steps. I'm happy to take questions.
What is the size of the pipeline? The pipeline itself that was severed. What are the leaks that are severed?
Okay, first I'm going to answer Ms. Proctor's question of what is a riser. And if Enrique, do I have the controller? So in this picture, the riser, what we're referring to is this piece of pipe right here, which comes up out of the ground from the subsurface. It's a rigid pipe. In this picture, this valve is in the shut position, just like a water sprinkler valve. For those of you that have a water sprinkler system, if you turn this down so that it runs parallel to the pipe, that's the open position. This is also a riser line. It's a line that would run between a wellhead, which is what's pictured here, and a tank battery. Those lines serve different purposes at different times. It's just part of the production facility apparatus. If it was abandoned, an abandoned line would be disconnected at both ends. It should be sealed at both ends, and would not be carrying any product. In this case, there are, I think, still unanswered questions about whether that line was abandoned by disconnecting it at both ends, and at a later date it was reconnected to the wellhead, or whether it perhaps was only disconnected at one end and remained connected to the wellhead. And then the fact that it was discovered in the way that it was discovered, severed with a clean cut, there will be questions again about when that occurred. So development in this neighborhood, I'll go back to that picture. This picture is taken in 2009. This is the location of the well. I would guess I can't swear to that. I think this is Twilight Avenue. And that may be the well. But what you can see is that the subdivision started to the north and came south. As these roads get put in, sewer lines get put in. As those sewer lines get put in, or as those basements get excavated, very likely that the flow line, which was running up through here, gets severed. The timing and sequence of that is still unknown.
So is this likely the problem with the community developer and not the oil and gas company?
Again, not for me to make that determination about that. I'll just say that we don't have jurisdiction over developers.
According to your regulations, it should be capped at both ends if it's been abandoned. Was that line abandoned?
Again, I think there are questions about how that line was treated over time by different operators.
Was it abandoned though?
I don't think that's a question I can answer. That is how the Frederick Firestone Fire Protection District characterized it, as an abandoned line, and that was our initial understanding as well, that that was an abandoned line. The tank battery, there's a tank battery to the north that you can't see, and there's a tank battery off here to the west and about this location. At some point, flow lines that went from the Coors V6-14 had run to the north. They were rerouted to connect to this battery over here.
But they weren't severed on both ends, and they should have been according to the regulations. In other words, they weren't capped at both ends.
Again, a question that we don't fully know the answer to as far as whether it was ever disconnected from the well.
Matt, do these flow lines come under the regulatory purview of the commission? In other words, now are you taking over this part of the investigation, or is it still something, these questions that remain unanswered, that's still something in Firestone?
So the flow lines are within our jurisdiction, the lines that connect wells to production equipment, for example, as this line did. I think there is in part, our jurisdiction is administrative and civil. Might there have been rule violations in this sequence of events? Yes, there might have been. So that is something for us on a go-forward basis to evaluate.
And that these lines are not necessarily mapped, and there is no requirement to have those maps. If that's true, what does a developer do? Who do they call to figure out, is there a line beneath this home or basement about big? Clarify that a little bit.
Right, so there is a one-call line requirement in the state of Colorado. It's to make absolutely sure that if there's a point A, there's a point B. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that answers your question. Kelsey?
What do you mean by, first of all, I wanted to let you know that your audio for the recording on YouTube doesn't seem to be working.
I think we identified that problem, and I hope we have it fixed.
Okay.
But we're not stopping.
Sure. What do you mean? I just hope it'll be available in full after this with the full audio. But I just want to know, when you say configuration, do you mean the valve or the cap? Like, how do you say there's nothing out of the ordinary with that configuration? And where does the well cap come into that configuration?
Well, the well is not capped, so I don't know quite how to answer that.
By the line.
And the line is also not capped. That's what I'm saying, is that in this picture, there is plumbing that connects the well to those lines in such a way that gas could flow through those lines. And again, depending on the position of the valve there, it could flow down that riser.
So it's like nothing appears to be.
Correct.
That particular well hadn't been running for some time, and then it was started up again. What is the protocol and the rules for when a well like that is started back up under the scenario that was operational with that particular well? What rules would govern restarting it up?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer that from sort of an engineering rule point of view. I will tell you that it's not uncommon for an operator to shut in a well for a period of time for a variety of reasons. That happens routinely for maintenance reasons, for production reasons, for inspection reasons, for cost reasons. And it's not a particularly unusual or out of the ordinary event to shut in a well and bring it back online days or weeks or several months later.
You said at this point it's unclear if the pipe was abandoned. What would make it clear? What would be the proper protocol so that you guys are under 100% impression that it is abandoned?
So under existing rules today, and it's COGCC Rule 1103, what is required is that riser, and I'll point to this riser over here, because that's clearly been capped, that riser would be cut off below grade, cut off below the ground. And the rule is 3 feet below grade or where it meets the flow line, with a lesser of those two things. So then we don't even see it, and it's clear, and in addition to being cut off, the line has to be sealed with inert material, has to be drained, sealed with inert material, and then cut off below grade.
And that is not the case with the line that we're talking about today.
So one at a time, yes, on both ends. Second, the NTO that we've just issued will require an operator to look at this situation and go cut off that riser. So that's in a sense what we're doing with the NTO is retroactively requiring today's requirement to apply to all existing abandoned lines, whether or not they were, regardless of when they were abandoned. Follow up?
And what sort of inspections or, just inspections do you guys have to check on lines to see if they're properly abandoned or not, if there are any inspections?
Yeah, so today it would be a routine part of an inspection. Going forward, it will be part of this whole NTO process, I think, where we are asking them to identify, again, a situation like this, we're asking them to identify that in the next 30 days, and then have an additional 30 days to finish the process, mainly cut that below grade. Let me get Kelsey, and then I'm gonna have to start making a list.
Again, apologize if you already answered this, but at the Firestone meeting, they said it was still unclear who owned those lines. Can we get a confirmation on, does Anadarko own those lines, or who does? The abandoned ones?
Well, I think the reason they're saying it's unclear is because there have been a series of operators over time. The current owner of that well is Anadarko.
But the question is, as the current owner, does Anadarko own and have responsibility over even abandoned lines that are associated with that well?
I think I'm not going to try to make that legal determination for you.
How large is this review? And how many wells will be reviewed now under this new order?
So there's two parts to the review. And the first part, which requires an examination of the flow lines, an integrity test on the flow lines, is for wells located within 1,000 feet of an occupied building. That's going to be a decent number of wells. The second part is that regardless of distance to an occupied building, we want you to identify situations like this with the line that was abandoned before 2001, where we required the lines to be cut off, and to go in and cut off those risers. So I mean, that might not be intuitively obvious to everyone.
This is thousands of wells that will be reviewed?
I think thousands is not an unreasonable guesstimate, given the number of wells, for example, in Weld County. I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to work left to right, my left to right.
Pointing at me.
Yes, sir.
Who does the inspections as now going forward? And how do you map all of these, probably a lot of gas lines throughout the state? Do you rely just on that 811? Or is there a map that can tell us how abandoned lines there are?
So that was about 6 questions, and I can't remember all of them, especially in the right order. So the inspection responsibility, COGCC inspects wells. We inspected 40,000 wells, close to that, 39,000, yeah, last year. But those are visual inspections primarily. Operators inspect their own wells. So I think that answers the first part of the question. There is not a comprehensive map of flow lines from the beginning of time. Under current rules, operators, I might have to check and see if I get this right, operators are required to tell us the planned route of a flow line for a new oil and gas well, and I think that started in 2005, 2006. Not certain. Okay. 2008. So when they submit an application for a location or a well, they tell us their planned route of flow lines. Part of this NTO will be to get better information about where those flow lines are, again, starting with within 1,000 feet of occupied buildings.
About the well itself, can you on if proximity played any role in proximity of the well to the home played any role in what happened? And also if the right now we're saying, Anadarko owns those or operates that line, but we don't know how many people were responsible for it. How are operators supposed to know who to go to or who to check with if there's a problem? I mean, who's responsible at this point? Someone has to be responsible.
So, sorry, I think I'm gonna, I apologize. I think I'm gonna have to ask you to state the question again.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the bigger question is, you know, at this point, we know that Anadarko has claim over this line, this abandoned line. Is that correct?
Yes.
But you previously said it's gone through several different operators. At the end of the day, how do you figure out who is responsible for this? I mean, someone should be responsible for tracking down if that valve is not correctly shut or not.
Okay. And then you asked a question about proximity too, so I'll come back to proximity. From COGCC's point of view, our jurisdiction over the administrative regulatory actions, we would look to Anadarko to see if it followed and was in compliance with our rules. Anadarko might, as a response to our enforcement action, say, wait a second, we can show that somebody else is responsible. That's their prerogative, but it's up to them to raise that in response to our enforcement action. As far as the greater picture here, you know, I think there's a different investigation that we do not have jurisdiction over, and I can't tell you how that will proceed. To proximity, I think that I would say to you that the flow line was cut relatively closely to this home. I think it's the proximity of the flow line cut and uncapped in proximity to a home that matters more in this case than the fact that the home was constructed within 200 feet of the well. I'm going to do one last shot on this side of the room, and then I'm going to come that way. So
going forward, my understanding, integrity tests aren't currently required on active lines. Are you going to, because you're requiring it this one time, are you going to start requiring that on an ongoing basis at this point?
So there are active integrity requirements, but there is also a 15 PSI cutoff. So if a line is operating at less than 15 PSI, we don't require integrity testing. We are going to require that for this round of integrity testing, and I think it's a continuing conversation about what happens next.
There's another line, I guess, another flow line. Is that through that riser, or is it through another? Is this just for the northbound line?
This well, you can't see it in this picture, does have flow lines that go to the west tank battery.
Any suspicion that the valve was turned vandalism or some other cause? Or, given the home was built in 15, I guess, did your investigation find if this was a problem in 2015 after the home was built, or was it just this year?
I have to put that in the category of unanswered questions at this point. Trip.
Matt, I have one question, and I want to just follow up about the distance of the flow line cut. Do you know what the distance was? How far was the flow line cut from this home?
I've heard two different numbers. Both of them are less than 10 feet.
Less than 10 feet, okay. And then my question was about Great Western shut down 61 wells, Anadarko voluntarily shut down 3,000. That's actually all of its vertical wells in the state of Colorado. Are you aware of any other operator that has done so or is contemplating doing so in light of this situation?
I am aware of one operator who has expressly told me they were doing something with wells that were within 250 feet of occupied buildings.
Who's that?
I'd rather not say.
Review that you were, that's going on, going to be going through the two-part, if that review had taken place a month ago, would you have found something wrong with the situation that ultimately led to this explosion?
I'd like to hope so, because I hope we find anything going forward that mirrors this situation.
Guys, just a few more here. I want to give you guys time, but we got to wrap up.
Kelsey.
In response to my question about whether Anadarko has responsibility, you said you didn't want to make a legal distinction, but just from this question, it sounded like you said they do actually have responsibility for the flow line. And my question is, I guess, one, I want to confirm that, and two, just with so many operators down the line, if one of the operators hypothetically had like gone out of business, for example, at some point does the COGCC end up being responsible if some of these operators are no longer working in Colorado or operating at all?
Okay, so first of all, let's define what we're talking about responsible for. So let's say responsible for cleaning up any environmental impacts that occurred as a consequence of this. If there is no operator to be found or no operator with money, then yes, I would say that responsibility falls to the COGCC. We've had a lot of conversations over the last year or so about orphan and abandoned wells, and that's what we would dub that situation where we can't identify an operator or the operator's gone bankrupt or et cetera. The distinction I made in answering the other woman's question from yours is that there's a distinction to be drawn between our jurisdiction, which is about our rules and regulations, and other jurisdictions and enforcement regimes, including civil liability in a court of law and criminal liability, et cetera. I don't have jurisdiction in either of those realms, and I am not going to make, comment on that. We look to the current operator when there's a violation of our rules. In some instances of historic incidents, the current operator can attempt to make a case that it was the prior operator, not them. That's all I'm saying. Because I think there are still questions about timing and sequence here, Anadarko may say, all of this happened long before 2014 when we took over the well. I'm not saying they are saying that. I'm telling you that that could be a scenario that plays out. So, yes, ma'am.
For people who are watching this at home tonight and they want to know, okay, is there an abandoned flow line near my home? How can they find that out? What would you say to them?
I would say to them that in our experience, what has taken place here is highly unusual and required a confluence of a number of different events to come to pass. And it's horrible and horrifying. But there are a lot of wells that have been drilled that have operated for a very long time in this state. And this has, an unprecedented sort of event with respect to those. So we will take the steps that we've outlined here to, again, seek to absolutely minimize any possibility of this happening again. And I think operators will be hyper diligent and hyper vigilant about this situation going forward.
So there really is no way for them to have their question answered in terms of whether or not there's an abandoned.
I mean, I can answer that in sort of broad ways. Is there any oil and gas anywhere near you? When did it start? When did it happen? Did the subdivision move in after the fact? But can I point them? There is not a map I can demonstrate to you or hand out to them and say there are some here and there are not any here. I think, across Weld County, there are a lot of wells that have been there and drilled for a long time. How about one more? Is that okay?
To follow up on that, and we kind of asked her about it earlier, should there be a map? I mean, the COGC has a great GIS mapping tool, shows the wells, shows names, shows inspections. Seeing as how the flow line is the primary issue at play here, yet it's not mapped. Should it be? Should operators be required? Should COGC require that going forward after what has happened in this situation?
I think it's a fair question, and I think it's a question that will be debated here in the next, weeks or months. Thank you all very much.
When these companies are turning on a gas line, isn't that their responsibility to make sure that they're safe before turning them on?
I would like to think that anybody that turns on a gas line knows where it's going to go, where it ends up. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.